we're going to have a hybrid conversation and presentation about transforming urban deliveries. And joining me this morning are Yasha Franklin Hodge. He is the Chief Information Officer of the City of Boston, probably watching your flights to see if you can get home, right? And, yep, right. And Stefan Knupfer. He is the Senior Partner with McKinsey & Company. He's focused on urban mobility. And Yasha and I are going to sit here and take some notes while Stefan talks about some new analysis and research that they've done on transforming urban deliveries. Stefan, take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk to you very quickly for 9-10 minutes. I promise I'm going to be very quick. Number two is this is about kind of two reports that we actually published on future of mobility. One about a year ago, how people move around, actually literally today for this conference. One that actually how things are moving around. Parcels, products are moving around in city environment. Very quickly, what I would like to talk about, future of mobility is obviously the topic. I want to actually make sure at the end you have about kind of 3-4 things that you take away. Number one, we do believe that future of mobility is actually more like a revolution that is going to come, and it's going to come significantly faster than most people would think. Second, we do believe it's going to happen in cities. That's exactly why we have Yasha here, and obviously we're going to talk about this, what it means for Boston. It's going to happen, obviously, in large global cities first. And on the other side, I believe it's not going to happen in the existing system, because the existing system will not get us there. So the third thing is then we will need, and it will be technology-driven, new technology will enable us to get into this future of mobility. The end state will be significantly better. It will be more fun to live in cities. On the other side, the transformation, the transition is something that we jointly have to figure out. And I run through this rather quickly. So why cities? Why cities are so important? 80% of global GDP is in cities. That's where the money is. That's where people live. The next thing is on the other side, there's also problems because we already have 70% of the global greenhouse gas emissions in cities. So it's actually not very healthy to live in cities. And then the next thing is that over half of the world population are living in cities, and more actually move to cities. So there will be more people will live in cities. Now think about the congestion and think about the pollution that we already have in cities. Now you know more people are going to move into cities. And then the other thing is then when more people move into cities, they do a lot of things, but they also do two things. They move around, interesting enough. And then the second thing is obviously they buy stuff, and they buy more and more stuff through the internet. So there's a forecast that the internet, obviously e-commerce is going to grow by 40%. If this happens, more and more delivery will obviously go to individual peoples and their home. So you're going to have more traffic of more people coming around. So all of this is not really good, and it's actually difficult. Get back kind of what you see today actually in cities. Now, let me just talk about a little bit the existing system, because we are so used to it. We actually used it for pretty much 100 years, and we haven't changed it. Think about a normal car. It's actually a big investment, the second big investment most likely after you actually bought your house, and you park it for pretty much 96% of the time. That's a really bad investment, and very honestly, usually in cities, you pay a lot of money to park it. So there's a much better use, obviously, of a car. How can we utilize it better? The next thing is, if you look at the energy, there is a very little portion, and you see this in the middle, kind of this orange piece. That's actually what you really use to move a person. Everything else is waste. Most of this is actually heat that actually goes away. So it's really bad. The next thing is actually, if you look at accidents, 95% of the accidents are driving errors. Out of this, 1/3 is actually drunk driving. Another third is actually that people don't pay attention. That's something a machine would never do. So therefore, very quickly, we'll figure out that autonomous driving is actually safer. And then the next thing is, if you look at roads, about 50% actually of a city space is occupied by parking, by roads, by driveways, all those different things. About 10% of the roads are used to full capacity in peak times. So the solution, very honestly, for traffic jams is not building more roads. Actually, it's figuring out to better use existing roads. And that's what we are talking about. The good thing is there's new technology, a lot of new technology. And all of these technologies are big trends, and they work together in a city very, very fast. Shared mobility, obviously, that means you use an existing vehicle more because you share it. Electrification, obviously, in this electrification, there is no tailpipe emission. Therefore, it's actually, if you keep it outside of the city, that works. Connectivity with your cell phone, with Waze, you always know where the traffic is. Autonomous driving is obviously not only that you're not having a driver in there, it is actually also that an autonomous car can drive faster, can actually drive closer to each other because they brake faster, all those different things. So using road capacity also significantly. And then you add to this the e-commerce, you add to this kind of the same-day delivery. So there are a lot of trends, obviously, that are helpful and that actually used in the right way can make living in the city significantly better. And we're going to have actually, well, less pollution, so it's going to be healthier. We're actually going to be more convenient because you can use intermodals. It's going to be significantly safer, as we talked about it. It's going to be greener, and it's going to be less expensive. So the end state is actually very, very interesting and very good. Now, if you look at this, the question is then, so which cities are going to actually be the first ones? So we looked at more than 2,000 cities globally, and then analyzed this. And we do believe that there are specific city archetypes. So modern cities, Western cities like New York, London, Paris. There might be actually big cities like Mexico City, which might have a different archetype. Cities that have to do something, like Shanghai, like Delhi. Large cities, growing cities, but obviously they have significant health issues there. There might be suburbs, actually, like the typical North American suburbs there might be. What we're trying to say is it's very important for business and actually also for city leaders to figure out which city is going to be the early adopters, because those actually are the ones that you want to work with. Now, in the new report, what we have done is actually that we look at commercial vehicles because of higher utilization of them, higher fuel consumption, more pollution with their powertrain. So they actually are an even bigger problem, while smaller with the number, but a bigger problem for cities. And that's kind of where the second report focuses on. And what we came up with is actually not necessarily a lot of kind of new ideas, but very honestly, the existing ideas that we actually came up with, and we prioritized, we looked at over 100, we prioritized about 20. 6 of them have the biggest impact and pretty much work in every city. If you take them, urban consolidation center, an existing kind of concept, but with new technology really works, because at one point, as a city, you have to decide, is everybody allowed to drive in the city in and out with an empty truck, for example? Night delivery, a real issue, not actually a new idea, but if you combine it with electrical vehicles, it reduces the noise. If you have autonomous, you don't have to have actually people driving at night. So all of them actually as a combination might work significantly better. And as I said, we have 2 reports out there. The one is actually a year old that talks about people moving around. The new one that you will find also here kind of laid out is the one that talks about kind of what we call commercial mobility. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. I wanted to start with Yasha to, first of all, I would love to know which city you identify with in that model. But also how you've been impacted in Boston by some of the megatrends that Stefan just brought up.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think Boston in that model is kind of in between the second and third. We're a dense European-style city. We're not at the scale of some of the global megacities, but we also don't have the suburban urban feel that many American cities do. So we are being affected by the shifts in urban logistics. I mean, we don't have a lot of hard data on this, and that's one of the challenges that we're facing, but we see it every day on the roads of the city. We see the congestion, we see the conflict that comes, and there are more and more vehicles that are involved in logistics in the city. So, you know, a personal example that I get to see every morning on my bike ride into work, I go down a fairly major street that feeds into downtown, and every single morning at 8:45, there is a tractor trailer parked blocking one of the travel lanes delivering to a donut shop. And the trailer is bigger than the donut shop, but for whatever reason, that has proven to be economically efficient for the company to operate such a large vehicle, despite the fact that it has huge externalized costs in terms of congestion and safety for everyone else around it. So you then magnify that by thousands of times a day in different contexts, and you start to get a sense of the scale of how much this is impacting cities, especially as this continues to grow.
That the stat on there about the parking spots and sort of the space dedicated to the travel infrastructure. Is that about the same? 50%, I think what it said, it was dedicated of the land.
Yeah, that seems about right. I mean, it's you know, we are like many cities. I mean, we don't have the level of surface parking that you see in places like Atlanta, but we have a tremendous amount of on-street parking, and you know, the road network and the urban fabric was rebuilt over decades to be focused around the automobile, and now we're trying to change that.
So you mentioned, I mean, obviously first of all, good on you for your bike riding, but secondly, you mentioned data, right? You don't have the data, so how are you moving towards getting the data? You're the chief information officer, and maybe what kind of data, you know, could you get from the private sector that might help?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think we're starting to see some interesting private sector collaborations with the city, less on the logistics side, but more thinking about data from Uber. We have a data sharing agreement that helps us understand their impact on the road system. We get data from Waze, which gives us a really fine-grained view on congestion and road speeds. We've actually used that for a bunch of experiments that we've run.
I'm sorry, you get the data, they give it to you?
They actually give it to us, yeah. And so we're able to run experiments like, what if we change our enforcement strategy for double parking? Does that improve congestion or not? And so those kinds of things become really valuable tools. You know, there's no central registry of every commercial delivery that's happening in a city, and I don't think we're going to see that anytime soon. But we can start to think about how we tap into new data sources and new analytic tools to help us test out the impact of interventions. And if we do pilot some of the things that Stefan talked about in his proposal of night deliveries or load pooling, things like that, we have some really interesting tools now that can measure whether or not that makes a positive impact on the environment.
Yeah, actually, so we'll go to that. The 6 models: urban consolidation centers, night deliveries, electric vehicles, load pooling, parcel lockers, autonomous ground vehicles. Stefan, which methods are emerging most quickly? Or is it all combination of them?
The combination obviously will be the most powerful one. We do believe that they have different time frames, exactly as you described. To be quite honest, electrical vehicles will come very, very quickly because we talked about them forever. They have been around, first time 1920. But actually over the next few years, I think we have about next 2 years, I believe if I'm correct, globally, about 350 new kind of electrical vehicles worldwide coming into the market. So this is actually never seen before. So therefore, electrical vehicle will happen. That's actually passenger cars. Interesting enough, on the truck side, that's where people have picked us up significantly faster. There was not a lot of discussion, very honestly, about it 12, 18 months ago. And all of a sudden, it peaks, kind of, that everybody talks about electrical trucks. The technology is more or less the same. So therefore, that's actually something that anyway comes. I do believe that the parcel lockers, the autonomous ground vehicles need a little bit more technology. There's actually a little bit more difficulties on the investment side. I do believe, as I said, the urban consolidation center, it just makes sense at one point to think about kind of that not everybody drives into the city, does something in the city, drives, parks, whatever he does.
Right.
So you want to have literally in cities a fully loaded kind of truck, car. And then the third thing is the night delivery. Just imagine you would, during the day, you wouldn't have any trucks or vans actually on the roads. Just think about the picture that you have. Nobody parks there. I'm living in New York City at this point. You have the avenues. And literally, you can go slalom between kind of where people live. If you do this, you have 4 lanes. It makes a big difference.
Have you, I mean, like, where have you seen some successful tests? And I want to know what you're doing, if you're doing any of them in a moment. But, you know, of those methods, are there?
So I give you just an example. On the night delivery, Barcelona has tested it. And actually, obviously, the right thing to do as a city, you test it very small, little. If it works, then you roll it out rather quickly. And I do believe that Spain actually thinks about kind of rolling it out significantly more. So that's just one little example. So all of those things actually are, from a technology standpoint, pretty much tested. Right. I also believe that the technology will drive it. And then I do believe that city governments and other governments obviously need to kind of adapt and help to find the right environment, obviously, to work together, because it's going to be very interesting because you have to have the private sector working together with the government to find the right solution.
So Yasha, are you trying any of those things? And if so, what would be the metric for success that would make you want to roll it out more quickly?
Sure, absolutely. So we're in some very early stage planning around some of these things, especially thinking about what tools we could have to incentivize night deliveries and urban consolidation in logistics. I think we echo that idea that the answer is all of the above. There are some things like autonomous ground vehicles that are going to take a while both for the technology to mature, but where we also don't really know how those will interact in the urban environment, especially if they're traveling on sidewalks. So there's some learning ahead of us. I think the big thing for us, though, is to think about incentive alignment, because what we're already seeing is that some of these things are happening not because of government action, but because it makes economic sense. We're already seeing parcel lockers in new buildings becoming a standard feature because it's an amenity that tenants demand, and it lowers cost and complexity for building managers and logistics companies. We're seeing, I think, the adoption of the private sector of some really interesting tools that are machine learning models and real-time analytics platforms for optimizing delivery schedules and routing, because they want to spend less time driving. That's cost for them. So the challenge for us as a city is going to be to say, where can we regulate? And we are often limited. I mean, we don't have the ability to say all deliveries must be at night. But if we can create an incentive for a business to do a pilot project and then start to use data from some of these new sources we have to measure congestion impacts, to measure emissions, hopefully in partnership with the logistics companies that are operating the deliveries, then we can start to create a framework for saying, hey, it's good economics, it's good for the city as a whole, for the public good, and it's helping us collectively meet some very important sustainability goals.
What's going to tell Barcelona that that's successful? Like, what is it that they're studying specifically?
So they study more or less kind of how it literally works. So a real life example. So you bring in obviously electrical vehicles for noise reduction. You have equipment that is actually noise reduced. You need to figure out kind of how somebody at night can deliver. So what is actually, who is the recipient, all those different things. And you have to figure out the economics. For me, the interesting part, I think, on this entire thing is that the discussion, if this is going to happen, is more or less through. So people say it's in the money. The second thing is people say it's going to happen. So people only talk about kind of how it's going to happen. So, and I talk to automotive manufacturers, I talk to automotive suppliers, I talk to cities. I talked to infrastructure providers, and I thought I would get actually some pushback on all those messages. I didn't get any pushback for the last year on any of those topics. So the question is only how do we go about it? Interesting enough, we also work together with C40, my team and I right now, which obviously the future of mobility is going to play a significant role, and also you see kind of the same reaction there.
Yeah. So it takes probably digital investment, though. So, like, what do you have to do to make your digital infrastructure ready for that?
Sure. I mean, it takes technology investment by all parties. Cities need to have better data about how their roads are being used. They need to be able to consume data coming from the private sector, and private sector companies need to invest in their tooling and their systems. And while I share Stefan's optimism that this is going to happen, the cautious note that I'd sound is that the change is hard, and especially when you're in a governmental or regulatory environment where there's a political dimension to it. You can sit on any street corner in downtown Boston and watch how the curb is used. And what you will see more often than not is that you have 3 or 4 parked cars, and over the course of an hour or two, there's going to be probably 15 short-term uses of road space where an Uber picks up or drops off a passenger, a UPS truck parks and makes a delivery. But we've still decided to allocate most of that curb space to the long-term storage of people's private vehicles, which is not really necessarily the most ideal model for it. But at the same time, there's a constituency for that. And so having that conversation with the local business to say, hey, maybe we should take away this parking spot, that's a difficult and time-consuming conversation to have. So I think that's really one of the biggest roles of government, is to be that facilitator of these discussions about how to make change and how to shift the way we've allocated the limited resources we have to have better outcomes for all.
With that, we need to hit the road. So I'm going to thank Stefan and Yasha. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.